A number of states and armed groups have involved themselves in the ongoing Syrian civil war. A number of sources have emphasized that as of at least late 2015, early 2016, the Syrian Arab Republic was dependent on a mix of volunteers and militias, rather than the Syrian armed forces. Before the uprising and war broke out, the Syrian armed forces were estimated at 325,000 regular troops and 280,000 to 300,000 reservists. Of the regular troops, 220,000 were army troops, and the rest in the Navy, Air Force and Air Defense Force. Following defections as early as June 2011, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimated that by July 2012, tens of thousands of soldiers had defected. The Syrian NDF was formed out of pro-government militias. They received their salaries and military equipment from the government, and in 2013 numbered around 100,000 troops. The force acts in an infantry role, directly fighting against rebels on the ground and running counter-insurgency operations in coordination with the army, who provides them with logistical and artillery support. The force has a 500-strong women's wing called Lionesses of National Defense, which operates checkpoints. NDF members, like regular army soldiers, are allowed to loot the battlefields. The Shabia are unofficial pro-government militias drawn largely from Syria's Alawite minority group. Since the uprising, the Baathisht Syrian government has been accused of using Shabia to break up protests and enforce laws in restive neighborhoods. As the protests escalated into an armed conflict, the opposition started using the term Shabia to describe civilians they suspected of supporting Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian government and clashing with pro-opposition demonstrators. The opposition blames the Shabia for the many violent excesses committed against anti-government protesters and opposition sympathizers, as well as looting and destruction. In December 2012, the Shabia were designated a terrorist organization by the United States. Bashar al-Assad is reported to have created the Shabia in the 1980s for government use in times of crisis. Shabia have been described as a notorious Alawite paramilitary, who are accused of acting as unofficial enforcers for Assad's government, gunmen loyal to Assad, and, according to the Qatar-based Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, semi-criminal gangs comprised of thugs close to the government. Despite the group's image as an Alawite militia, some Shabia operating in Aleppo have been reported to be Sunnis. In 2012, the Assad government created a more organized official militia known as the Jaysh al-Shabi, allegedly with help from Iran and Hezbollah. As with the Shabia, the vast majority of Jaysh al-Shabi members are Alawite and Shiite volunteers. In February 2013, former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Subhi al-Tufaili, confirmed that Hezbollah was fighting for the Syrian army, which in October 2012, General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah had still denied was happening on a large scale, except to admit that Hezbollah fighters helped the Assad government retain control of some 23 strategically located villages inhabited by Shiites of Lebanese citizenship. Nasrallah said that Hezbollah fighters have died in Syria doing their jihadist duties. In 2012 and 2013, Hezbollah was active in gaining control of territory in the Al-Qusayr district of Syria. By May 2013, publicly collaborating with the Syrian army and taking 60% of Qusayr by the end of the 14th of May. In Lebanon, there have been a recent increase in the funerals of Hezbollah fighters, and Syrian rebels have shelled Hezbollah-controlled areas. As of the 14th of May 2013, Hezbollah fighters were reported to be fighting alongside the Syrian army, particularly in the Homs Governorate. Hassan Nasrallah has called on Shiites and Hezbollah to protect the shrine of Sayyida Zainab. President Bashar al-Assad denied in May 2013 that there were foreign fighters, Arab or otherwise, fighting for the government in Syria. On the 25th of May 2013, Nasrallah announced that Hezbollah was fighting in Syria against Islamic extremists and pledged that his group will not allow Syrian militants to control areas that border Lebanon. In the televised address, he said, "If Syria falls in the hands of America, Israel and the Takfiris, The people of our region will go into a dark period. According to independent analysts, by the beginning of 2014, approximately 500 Hezbollah fighters had died in the Syrian conflict. On the 7th of February 2016, 50 Hezbollah fighters were killed in a clash by the Jaish al-Islam near Damascus. These fighters were embedded in the Syrian army formation called Army Division 39. Iran continues to officially deny the presence of its combat troops in Syria, maintaining that it provides military advice to Assad's forces in their fight against terrorist groups. Since the civil uprising phase of the Syrian civil war, Iran has provided the Syrian Arab Republic with financial